Welcome back. I want to do a quick review of our security and how our app is working right now. Because putting a secure web app online is a very, very important responsibility of the web developer. Let's go back to our code base. There's two main problems that I see so far. The first thing is that we're not doing anything called validation. If I'm going to sign in here, and I go to my sign in controller, if a user doesn't enter the proper email or enters something that we don't expect, maybe leaves the email field blank or the password field blank, well, what happens then? And same with register. If we go to register and a user doesn't type in the proper email or name or password, we technically still register them. Because if we leave email blank, name blank, password blank, it'll just enter a blank user into the database. Let's go to the app and show you what that means. If I leave this blank and click register, look at that. I'm entered into the app, and if I go back to the database and go to users, I see a blank user. And this isn't very harmful, but it showcases one important topic that you really want to focus on in your app, and that is validation. Making sure that when you communicate between the front end and the back end, there's a few layers of security. First, the front end will do its own validation. For example, if we go to the sign-in page or the register page, within our front end, within our React app, we'll actually check before, when we click register, we'll have an on submit button, and on submit is going to check to make sure that the name is not empty. The email has proper email format, such as having an @ or a .com at the end. And then password will have some sort of validation for, let's say it has to be greater than 6 characters. And now the front end sends that validated information to the back end. And an important thing that you want to make sure with your server is that the server never trusts anything received from the front end. So it should do its own validation. That is to check email, name, and password, and make sure there are values that it wants to enter and transact into the database. One way we can do this, well, we can simply say that if email or name or password, and we can just do the not, so that is the opposite. So if this is empty, it'll turn to true. If this is empty, it'll turn to true. This is empty, it'll turn to true. So if any of these are empty, we can just respond status 400, and we can just respond with incorrect form submission. Let's save this and see what happens. I'll save. The one thing I want to do is actually go back to my database, and I have my pSQL running here. If I go to login or users, I want to delete the empty user now. And this one as well. Perfect. If I go back here and try to click register, I still get the register. That's because if I go back, I see that I get an error here. And I get can set headers after they are sent. And this is a little bit of a trick, because if you go here and open up the console, all right, we have a bad request from the server. But this if statement gets run, and then it continues on and does this as well. Because remember, in order to end execution within a function, we have to say return. So that way, if this gets run, it returns from this function, and this part never gets run. Let me save that. Go back to our app. And let's just refresh here. We'll just do a blank user. Again, we're getting logged in because now when we go to the front end, if you remember in our register file on the front end, when we click register, well, we're fetching and we're just checking if user. And this user, because we're responding in here with incorrect form submission, user will be that. So let's just check here for ID. We save. And remember, this is something that we did with our sign-in as well in the previous videos. If we go back to register, try to register. It's not letting me because if I open up the console, I have failed to load resources. If I go to network, try that again. Go to register, I get incorrect form submission. So that is really, really important. The server and the client should do its own validation and make sure that it handles all possibilities. If an attacker, for example, enters some really, really bad piece of code instead of an email, well, we need to validate against that and make sure that we take proper action based on that. So we can add things like this into other parts of our app, especially ones where we accept input. Luckily for us, that's for our register, and then we have our sign-in as well. And then for the sign-in, we can simply just copy and paste. And here we're using request.body.email and password. So we can simply just, again, destructure it. Password from request.body. We'll remove the name. And again, we'll just remove the request.body from these just to make it a little bit cleaner. And if I save this, this should work as well. Let's go to sign in, make sure I'm not able to sign in. Perfect. And if I go to wes@gmail.com, 1, 2, 3, sign in, I'm able to sign in. All right, so that's the first part of the security I wanted to cover. There's obviously a few more things that we can do here, but I think you get the idea. The next thing, and another major flaw in our app, is that when we submit an image, let's grab this, and let's open up the tab, the network tab here, click detect. And if you look at the image endpoint, well, that one we take care of, but if you look at the outputs, this is where we're asking API clarify for the request. If I click on this and look at the headers, and I look at the authorization, I get the key with DCB17E, and if I go back to the front end, and under app.js, DCB17E, that's our API key. We're making our API key, which in my case, it's a free one, but when you're using an API that costs money, somebody could steal this information and use your API key to just load that API with requests and make you, well, pay a lot of money. And you never want to do this. When you're playing as a developer on your own project, that's fine. But things like this shouldn't happen. So one thing we can do to avoid this is actually move this to the back end instead of the front end. Let me show you how we can do that. We're going to go back to our front end. And in our front end, I'm actually going to copy the clarify information to the back end and remove it from the front end. So if you remember, we need to just install clarify on the back end. So I'm going to stop the server and do npm install clarify. so that we have in package.json. We will import it, this time using require. So let's go to our handle image. And in the handle image, we'll just import. And instead of import, we'll do const clarify equals require clarify. And we will just copy exactly what we have in our app. I'm going to remove this. I'm going to cut this out. Use our API key right here. Then scrolling down, we take a look at where we use our API key. In our case, it's here, app models. And here, we want to just do the clarify and then grab our response. So this bottom part we can keep. We just need the clarify call to now be coming from the backend. So we'll copy that, go back to our backend. Let's put that in place because we have app now from the new instantiation of clarify. And we will now need to grab the input. So it sounds like we'll need a new endpoint. Let's clean this up a bit. I'm going to do predict, clarify. Well, let's do it over here just so we can see it better. I'm going to minimize this a bit. In app.models predict, we will predict with our request.body.input, which we obviously don't have, but now we know that we need the input. And we can wrap this around a function just like this. We can say const handle API call, and this one will receive a request response. And we'll just move this up here. So now we can just say handle API call at the bottom over here. And on our server, we can create a new endpoint for image. And we can do a post request because we'll add it to our request.body. And we'll just call it image URL. And the image URL endpoint will have the handle API call. It won't need the database. We'll definitely need to import it, but we have it on the image object already. Okay, so if I save this, we now need to make sure that we receive the body with the URL. So going to the front end, we'll say that on submit, we need to fetch, and let's just copy this, what we have here for now. We want to fetch image URL. It's going to be a post method, and it'll have a JSON of input, and that input will simply be the thisState.input. That's going to give us a response, and that response will keep trickle down this way. But keep in mind that because this is a fetch, we'll have to do response.json. So that's simple enough to do. Let's fix the indentation here, and we'll do a .then response equals response.json. We'll save, and we'll want to go back and make sure that this is working. So let's go to our server, go to image, and make sure that we're responding here with .then data. And this data will have a response.json of data, whatever this gives us. If there's some sort of an error, we'll do a catch. And we'll say response status 400, we'll do JSON unable to work with API. Let's save. We'll see if this works the first time. It usually doesn't. But if we sign in with wes@gmail.com, 1, 2, 3, let's sign in. Oh, we have a bit of an issue. Let's go to console. Failed to fetch. Oh, we need to actually npm start our server. All right, and now we get some errors. All right, we have missing brackets, so we just made a bit of a syntax error here, and that's because I forgot a period in here. Let's save that, and if we go to our front end's running, back end is running. Let's close this and try this again. All right, I'm signed in. If I copy this image again, moment of truth. All right, we're getting the image, but the response, something's not working. We have failed to fetch. The server responded with a status of 500. So we get an error in the server, and it looks like handle API call is not a function. So let's go to server, and my terrible spelling mistake again. This always gets you with the spelling. Let's try that once again. We'll clear this, send, detect. No errors. All right, look at that. That's working. Amazing. I see no errors in my API or the front end. So that wasn't bad. And if I actually go back to the request, go to the network tab, and let's check this. I'm going to press detect. If I go to image URL, we're not seeing any of our keys. The only thing we're seeing is a response, which is the response that we get from Clarify, but our server is running in our own environment and nobody has access to it. So let's go over what we just did. We created a new endpoint, and because we now have our own controllers, and it's regarding the image, we can add it to the image controllers, and within the image controllers, we create a new function and just pretty much copy and paste it exactly like we had on the front end. We respond it with JSON data, and this JSON data is now getting sent as response.json. So on the front end, we simply created a fetch request that sent the input, and we responded with our response. So not much really changed on the front end, except for the fact that now we're hiding the API key, and instead of having Clarify here, we have it on the back end. I hope that was some valuable security tips for you. There's lots of things when it comes to security, and it definitely is something that you have to get used to as you have more and more years of experience. But having that general rule of making sure that your machine, or in our case, your code base of front end and back end, never relies on the security of the other. Always focuses and makes sure that whatever inputs it gets from other places outside of itself is always validated. And we protect any secrets that we have from the outside world. Never trust anybody is pretty much the motto in security. So I hope that was insightful, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.